Welcome to Theology Thursday, an ecumenical space for students to discuss matters of faith and theology.
Sorry.
Hey, you copied me.
Jinx. I'm your host, Connor Grubbs.
I'm your co-host, Ryan Mock.
And I'm your co-host, Johnny Grubbs.
Hey, Ryan, who's this guy?
I don't know, I thought we fired him.
I thought he disappeared.
I've been a little busy.
Johnny's been busy.
Yeah.
Poor Johnny.
Poor John.
Hey, in light of John's busyness, this would have been his turn for subpoint. Maybe next week.
Did you have a subpoint you were thinking about?
Not really, no.
I have a subpoint that I was thinking about.
You are the superior Johnny.
I'm
Debatable.
I'm
I'm the inferior Connor.
the
Yes, you are.
I'm the Rachu to Johnny's Pikachu.
That's a Raichu.
I don't watch Pokemon.
Yeah, it's kind of a big fail.
Yeah. Only the
Rachu,
superior
Raichu.
the superior
difference.
Johnny would not watch Pokemon.
I don't know about that, man.
All right, here's the deal. Here's my subpoint for this week. So, are y'all familiar with a man named Joshua Harris?
Yes.
Oh,
I know this.
I know where this is going.
Yeah, I know this
You know where I'm
subpoint.
going.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
So he wrote a book called "I Kissed Dating Goodbye."
Can I make a full confession as we move forward with this?
Yeah.
I am guilty of having loved that book for a season of my life and saying this is the way.
Many were.
I'm thankful that book was before my time.
I regret that book.
I've never read it, but I've heard about it. I think I read the intro where he talked about how he made out with a bunch of girls in an alley, and I was like, oh, well, that's nice, and then I just stopped.
Anyway, that's like we could do like a whole breakdown of that book.
Maybe we could discuss it a little bit more in the after show.
Yeah.
We're not going to get into the nitty gritty. So if you're a patron, then you can check out a little bit more discussion on this. If you're not, then you should go subscribe. So he was it 2019 that he announced that he was no longer a Christian?
Was it that long ago?
2019?
I think so, yeah.
May have been 2020. I think it was 2019. Basically just announcing that he no longer identified as a Christian, that he was sorry for a lot of the views that he, taught, and that he was getting a divorce as well. So for a lot of conservative evangelicals, it's like, no, the purity culture guy's getting a divorce? What? Some people were more concerned about that than the fact that he'd become, I guess agnostic would probably, he doesn't use any self-identifier, and he's very intentional about that and says that,
Which is kind of lame, if you ask me.
But if you hear where he's at right now, he's agnostic.
Right.
So really interesting. And honestly, here's the thing. One, he did have a lot to apologize for. There was so much about that book and purity culture teaching in general, which he certainly had a hand in, that was very damaging and very problematic. So I think him admitting that is a good thing.
Yes.
And his reasons for deconstructing, I can understand. There's a lot of big questions, and there's not a lot of space to ask those in evangelical culture. And there's a huge gap between orthodoxy and orthopraxy, between what people say they believe and that actually being lived out. So all of those things, and so I was sympathetic to that, and very interested to hear what he had to say. He's been on a couple podcasts and stuff, and he's after. It's been a little over a year now since he first made this public announcement, and he's kind of been here and there doing some things. And I don't think it's totally wrong for his deconstruction to be public in a sense. I think you do need to have some time to process. But I think as long as you're, in the same way that we don't claim to be experts on theology, we're just having conversations and we want to share them. if you're saying like, look, I'm not an authority in any sense. I'm just sharing where I'm honestly at. Like, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. And he said that it's for him, it's part of his healing process because he feels like he has to kind of do some damage control for all these years of things that he taught that he thinks are problematic. Some of them were.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that was fine and interesting, and I really hoped to see him come back around to a truer and more genuine form of faith, and maybe that'll still happen. However, what I find kind of ironic is he just recently announced a master class in deconstruction, essentially is what it is. It's this crash course, and it costs $275 to enroll. And I just find it incredibly ironic. First of all, that you would have a paid class for deconstruction. Please pay me several $100s so I can help you not know what you believe. Like, what? How you can't even be an expert in that. That doesn't even make sense. Second, this is all very recent, so it's like, what makes you the authority on this?
Right.
And again, the very nature of it, how can anyone be an authority on this?
It would be like, the equivalent would be like if he got a divorce and like a month through the process he released a course saying how to get divorced.
Right.
You know, that'd just be so bizarre.
And what I find the most ironic about it is he's talked about in some recent interviews how people have asked him, he was on the Bible for Normal People podcast, and they were asking him, there's some, do you think that the evangelical, I don't think they use this phrase, but we use the phrase, industrial complex,
Mm-hmm.
had something to do with what happened? Like, you were super young, probably shouldn't have been speaking to these matters anyway, but it was kind of controversial, it was a hot topic at the time, and they knew it would sell big bucks. So publishers were like, yeah, let's go for this. And he talks about how there is a lot of this kind of marketing and numbers game that's played in evangelical culture with books, conferences, all this sort of stuff. And how that's wrong. That shouldn't be. We're manipulating people to generate some sort of income is what we see. When it comes to matters that are like, they shouldn't be turned into a product. You know what I mean? Not that publishing a book is wrong or anything like that, but just that there's a bent towards making money.
Right.
Yeah. Like, if that's the motive, not cool. Okay. So all that being said, now he's just flipped it. He's just
right. Exactly. That's the thing. He's doing the same thing in reverse.
He's using something. He's using something that's very personal and very heavy, and he's making a buck off of it, and it's really bizarre.
Well, did you see that he refunded everybody and gave? Yeah.
So here's what I did see, and I'll say this first, just so and the listeners are getting this, chronologically. He did say anybody who's damaged, who feels that they've been damaged by purity culture or any of my teachings, can get scholarships. So he was offering it free for anybody who basically just wrote him and said, like, this is how I was damaged by what you've done. So has another development come out since that?
Yeah, so he tweeted a link to his website where if you go to it right now, or to the website associated with this class, it's just a statement basically saying, hey, it's like, it sounds kind of humble, and maybe it is genuinely so, but basically the gist of it is, hey, I really like the internet because it gives me feedback. You guys gave me great feedback, and the feedback is that I shouldn't do this. I really appreciate you. I'm going to refund everybody and cancel the class.
Yeah.
So he isn't just making it free, he's like just taking it down altogether.
That's what I understood.
Yeah, I read the statement too, and I think if I remember correctly, yeah, he's just wiping it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really interesting. Very reactionary. I'm not sure what to think about any of it, but I found it strange.
I think for me, it's not enough to just be like, oh, that's a good point, guys. Like, you had to have known, like, in the back of your head that was, like, not a good idea, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting though, because I will say, I wonder that idea of how can I monetize this.
Yeah.
That was deeply ingrained to him within evangelical culture.
Well, I saw a few people tweet in something along the lines of like he kissed Christianity goodbye, but he did not kiss Grifton goodbye.
Right. Yeah. And when it's something that's so pounded into you, like, man, I mean, it's true. If you're within ministry, like, it's at every corner. And it's unfortunate because that shouldn't, be the case. But anyway, I kind of found it ironic. We'll see what happens with old Joshua Harris boy. So our main topic today. We got a great question from Dylan. I have not seen Dylan in several years now. But Dylan and I went to Cuba together in 2017. We were on a missions trip to Cuba. And he asked if we could talk about the Transfiguration. Specifically, what the heck happened to Jesus? Was it a permanent change? Was he just glowing, or was he just glowing for a second? Did it change his appearance? What's up with the Transfiguration? And why was it necessary? I think this is a great question.
It is.
I was talking to Ryan about this earlier. The Transfiguration is quite possibly one of the weirdest things to happen in the Gospels.
Yeah.
Like, there's some teaching that's maybe difficult to wrestle through. Jesus performs a lot of miracles and does a lot of things that we would find maybe a little, like, outlandish, and that takes some faith to... But this is by far the weirdest. Okay? So let's talk about the Transfiguration.
Yeah. It's so weird because like he does all this stuff, he does the teachings, he says some hard things, he says some good things, and then he just takes some of his disciples to the mountaintop and he's glowing, and then there's Moses and Elijah, and then a voice from above, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased, listen to him." And it's just so weird. It's so bizarre.
It's very weird. So
it seems so out of place.
Yeah, it does, and it's like, what is this? What does this even mean? What's the point here? So let's talk about it. First of all, if you're not familiar with the Transfiguration, I think that would be a good place to start.
Let's explain what is the Transfiguration?
Sharing the story. The word just means transformation.
Yeah.
So and so he asked, did it change his appearance? Yeah, that's exactly what the Gospels describe. So do you want to just read the passage? I have Mark 9 up right now. Then there's Matthew 17. It also appears in Luke. John, it does not appear in John.
So I am reading from Matthew 17, verses 1 through... I'll read verses 1 through 13.
Okay.
And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and have no fear." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Verse 9, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." And the disciples asked him, "Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" He answered, "Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. The end.
Gotcha. So I got Mark 9 pulled up. I was comparing it. Not much different.
Yeah.
So, weird story. Right in the middle of the ministry, Jesus calls 3 of the disciples to come up a mountain with them, and then all of a sudden we got some Old Testament characters. It's Jimmy Timmy Power Hour. We're having a crossover.
Yep.
And now, honestly, I always imagine this as like Force Ghost, like Elijah. I know that's probably not at all what it was like, but that's just the
It's like in episode 6 of Star Wars where like Obi-Wan and Yoda show up.
And like every 5 years they add another one into a new cut of the movie, you know. So, except no, you got Elijah, Moses, and Jesus starts glowing. And I love Peter's initial reaction. Let's build some tents. They need a place to stay. Yeah. Now, let's get into it. Okay.
So I think what would be valuable is to start with some context. Like, where is this story fitting with the rest of the story? Because this, on first glance, this story seems so out of place, but it happens in a certain context. And so we simply look back to Matthew chapter 16. And Jesus has some hard conversations with his disciples. Firstly, in verses 13 through 20 of chapter 16, we see here that Jesus is asking his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they say, some say that Jesus is John the Baptist, and some say that he's Elijah, and some others Jeremiah and the other prophets. And then Jesus asks them, who do you say that I am? And Peter says that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's great, right? So Peter recognizes that Jesus is the Son of God, the Christ. And then Jesus does a wild thing. He tells them that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed. So after Peter recognizes that Jesus is the Christ, then Jesus says, yes, you're right, but this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be killed. He does add that he's going to be raised on the third day. But just the fact that Jesus says, I'm going to be killed, that's disheartening, right, for the disciples. They've been following for several years at this point. And so what's Peter's reaction is, no, don't do that. And he says, this far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And then Jesus calls Peter Satan, And then Jesus says something very hard. He says in verse 24, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? So that's a very hard saying from Jesus, right? That if you want to follow me, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. And so that's the future that the disciples have to look forward to. Kind of a disheartening future, not a very glamorous future, that we would have to deny ourselves and take up our crosses and follow him. That's the context in which the Transfiguration happens. Chapter 16 ends, and then verse 17 starts. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, etc., etc. And so just 6 days after this conversation, then the Transfiguration happens.
Okay, so one thing I want to point out about the 6 days. We see right off the bat a couple of correlations between this occurrence, the Transfiguration, and Moses going to Mount Sinai to be with God. He has to wait 6 days. There's a 6-day waiting period apart from the rest of the Israelites before going up into the mountain. And then when he comes back, it talks about his appearance. He's glowing, right, with the presence of God. So there's a couple of connections there.
Parallels.
A couple parallels.
What I want to, I'm sure you have other points you want to touch on, what I also want to touch on too is in prepping for this, I read a lot of St. John Chrysostom, who was an early church father, and he wrote sermons on this very text. I did a lot of reading from him. And so he connected at the very end of chapter 16, after this hard saying that if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Then Jesus says this in verse 28 of 16. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay, so that's weird that Jesus says that. Now, some of you will not die until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And a lot of commentators speculate on what Jesus is talking about here. What a lot of commentators do believe, and I'm not saying they're right or wrong, I'm saying this is a common interpretation, is that when Jesus says this, that there will be some here who will not die until they see the Son of Man come in his kingdom, Jesus is referring to the Transfiguration. That in the Transfiguration they see the glory of God, they see a manifestation of the kingdom of God in Jesus. And so that's what verse 28 is referring to, that some of them will see the Transfiguration. This is the interpretation that John Chrysostom adheres to, and he says this about this. Jesus had discoursed much of dangers and death, and of his own passion, and of the slaughter of the disciples, and had laid on them those severe injunctions. And these were in the present life and at hand, but the good things in hope and expectation. So he talks about the examples, those who save their lives will lose it, etc. He, willing to assure their very sight, and to show what kind of glory that is wherewith he is to come, so far as it was possible for them to learn it, even in their present life, he shows and reveals it, referring to the Transfiguration, that they should not grieve any more, either over their own death or over that of their Lord, and especially Peter and his sorrow. So what Chrysostom is saying is that Jesus said these very hard things about how they're going to deny themselves and take up their cross. And so the Transfiguration was a way for Jesus to comfort them after these hard sayings. This is gonna suck. You're gonna have to deny yourself, take up your cross. But I'm gonna show you a little glimpse of the glory that awaits you after this. And so at that point that is the Transfiguration. So that Chrysostom says this is the purpose, one of the purposes of the Transfiguration, to give the disciples hope in the midst of these sayings that Jesus gives them.
Yeah. Well, and another thing I think that we see is, I think he's also giving his disciples hope and encouragement, but also just this really concrete, irrefutable evidence that he is the Messiah, right? Because the miracles and all that, while amazing and also attesting to the divinity of Christ, this is I'm the guy, right?
Yeah, you can't really deny when Jesus has Moses and Elijah show up and a voice from heaven says, "This is my son,"
So some of Dylan's question we simply cannot answer, because it's like, what was happening there? Well, we don't know. Because you can say, well, Transfiguration means transformed, that he was transformed in some glorious way. But we don't actually know what that looked like. We don't know if he was really glowing, or we have these images in our head, right? But it's not what the text says, So there's part of it that it's like we don't know what physically the disciples saw.
Yeah, and Chrysostom's going to talk about that a little bit later on. But yeah, me and Connor kind of talked about it a little bit at Chick-fil-A. Like, we kind of thought about Moses descending from Mount Sinai and his face was glowing,
right?
But it's also different, right? Because I don't think that Jesus's face was shining for a long time, and they had to cover him up, because surely that would have garnered questions.
Right. Well, and that was part of the question was it just for that time that he was glowing? Does it? And it seems to me, I think it's verse 9 in actually both of the texts, where it just stops.
Yeah.
They disappear, and everything's back in there, and they're like, okay. And it seems to me, the text doesn't explicitly say, but it seems to me that that's where it stops, because he then tells them, don't tell anybody about it. Right? And if he was still glowing and of this appearance that was supernatural, right? People would have noticed. And he was like, no, this was just between us.
Yeah.
I'll just share really briefly my take on the text because I didn't get a chance to study for it, so I only have my previous study, which was very brief and very simple. But the way that I understand the Bible, from the Hebrew Bible to the New Testament, it's the way that the biblical authors worked. It was part of the Hebrew heritage. It translated into the Jewish heritage as well. Is that they're telling true stories, but they're also using literary devices. So they're combining the two, right? And so it seems that there's a lot of literary device being used here, and one possible translation or understanding, interpretation of this seemed to me to make a lot of sense when you look at the sort of the line from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and that is that the point of that moment was, here's Jesus, okay, here's Moses who brought us the law, okay, and here's Elijah who represents the prophets, right? And so they're still important, obviously, because they're part of this moment, but then Jesus stands above them, right?
Yeah.
And so it seems to be communicating to the early readers of the Gospels, Jesus stands above the law and the prophets, and the law and the prophets are still alive in us. So all of that kind of works together to make a statement about who Jesus is and the importance of the law and the prophets in conjunction with Jesus.
Right.
So I do want to talk about why Moses and Elijah. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, well, a little bit. And I think I'll save this thought for the end, though.
Okay. So going further into what Chrysostom says about this event, Chrysostom gives 6 reasons why Moses and Elijah appeared. And the first reason is that one of the things that Jesus was dealing with, that the disciples were dealing with, was that people were claiming that Jesus was Moses and that Jesus was Elijah. That's what they were dealing with in Matthew 16. Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they're like, "People say that you're one of the prophets." So, firstly, this was a way in which Jesus was able to differentiate himself from Moses and Elijah. Secondly, this was a way to show that Peter was correct in confessing that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was not a prophet, he actually is the Son of God. Thirdly, people were also accusing Jesus of violating the law and the prophets, right? People were saying Jesus is breaking the Sabbath, he's breaking the law. They were also saying that, hey, Jesus is blaspheming. He's saying he's the Son of God. He's forgiven sins. He's blaspheming. So people were accusing him of violating both the law and the prophets. Moses was the guy who received the law, and Moses would not have overlooked somebody trampling on the law. Elijah was one of the greatest prophets, and so Elijah surely would not have tolerated someone claiming the glory of God. So by having Moses and Elijah there, Jesus is vindicating himself to say, hey, I am actually the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. I have not trampled and violated the law and the prophets, but I am above the law and the prophets. I have fulfilled that. Fourthly, Jesus in the Transfiguration, why Moses and Elijah? To demonstrate that he has the power over death, just as Johnny was saying, they're alive here.
Right.
Fifthly, to show the glory of the cross and to console the disciples' dread of the coming passion that Jesus had been alluding to. This is what I was talking about before. There's these hard sayings, but Jesus has given them a little taste of the kingdom. And then sixthly, Moses and Elijah were shown because Moses and Elijah exemplified what it meant to take up your cross and follow me. As far as Old Testament characters go, surely they exemplified those characteristics, I would say. So there's 6 reasons why Moses and Elijah were chosen.
Right. And for the Jewish reader, and we mentioned this is partly why this story is omitted from the Gospel account in John, because it's primarily for a Gentile audience. So most Gentiles reading that Gospel account would have been like, what's going on? But for Jewish readers, this was a very meaningful thing. And the emphasis really is on Elijah. Like, Moses is there, but the text even says, some translation, especially of Mark, it says Elijah with Moses. It's not even Elijah and Moses, it's Elijah with Moses. He's there too, right? because there's actually, and I'm trying to find it. Maybe you have it in your notes. But
Talking about Malachi?
Yeah, there's this Old Testament prophecy about Elijah that
Malachi 4 through 6. Want me to pull it out?
You want to give that a go?
I'll give that a go. Malachi 4.
That'd be nice.
4 through 6. Oh yeah. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the statutes and rules that I commanded him at Horeb for all Israel. 5. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and of the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction.
Yeah. So for the idea of Elijah being there in this, it's a fulfillment of a prophecy, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and then later on in Matthew, in verses 9 through 13, Jesus confirms to the disciples that Elijah has come, and it's actually referring to John the Baptist.
right.
It says that then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is a fulfillment of the Malachi passage.
Right. And so another thing to note here that we should talk about is the tents. Peter wants to make some tents for everybody.
Yeah, he says, Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah.
Now, he was totally ready to do that. I mean, he doesn't hesitate at all, right? So, people talk about, a lot of commentators talk about the Festival of Tabernacles or the Festival of Tents. So, but also, just in general, you see throughout the Old Testament, anywhere where the presence of God was, there's a covering, right? There's this idea that needs to be
like the tabernacle.
Yeah,
exactly. There's a lot of scholarly speculation that what Peter was getting at was like, oh, it's time, because Peter, even after the Transfiguration, which I think is interesting, and many of the disciples, if not all of them, did not get it until after Jesus was resurrected, like how Jesus was going to do things. And so there's an implication that perhaps Peter was going, oh, okay, well now we're going to get started. Like this is God's presence on earth.
Yeah.
And the tents may have just been like, okay, we got to build tents because this is where the presence of God is going to rest now. He may have been thinking in terms of a temple and tabernacle and all those kind of things,
And
as a Jewish man.
We see, the veil being torn is this really powerful imagery because the presence of God is not confined to a tent or an ark or anything like that. It is, the Holy Spirit inhabits the whole earth.
Yeah. On the other hand, I've heard that interpretation before. The other interpretation I've heard, and this is the one that Chrysostom adheres to, is that Peter has a motive here. In chapter 16, Jesus had told them what's going to happen to him. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and he's going to get killed. And so for Peter here, the motive for building tents is to establish this home for Jesus, in order to keep Jesus from going to Jerusalem. Because if he goes to Jerusalem, he dies. So this was Peter's way of keeping Jesus safe. Now, which interpretation is correct? I don't know. I've heard both.
Yeah, and I don't think there really is a way to know. I think the only evidence for that interpretation would be Peter's behavior elsewhere. I mean, even just the 6 days before, he's like, no, and then later he cuts somebody's ear off. Like, he definitely did not want anybody touching Jesus. He was like,
that is the pattern of behavior for Peter.
Don't hurt this guy. He's terrified of the idea. And speaking of that, of him kind of being, not wanting Jesus to die, I think another thing here that's really important is Jesus has been telling his disciples, will continue to tell his disciples that he's going to rise again, and they keep forgetting that. They
hyper focus on the crucifixion,
and they don't have categories for.
They don't have categories for it. And then here's Jesus with 2 Old Testament patriarchs that are like very important to the. Here's the resurrection, right? So I think he's demonstrating to them that like bodily resurrection is a thing that's part of the new kingdom, and he's demonstrating that to them by being there with Moses and Elijah. So it's almost like, okay, I've been telling you guys, but you don't get it. Here, see, resurrection is a reality in the new kingdom, and of course they still don't get it, but. I do think that's definitely something that is trying to be communicated to them here. And he tells them, don't tell anybody about this until I've risen again.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's almost like if they had gone and started telling people, because that was such a foreign concept, would be like, what? Like, it would have been too much for people. It wouldn't have really made sense. But after the resurrection, it's almost just like validating, adding to that point that, like, this is the Messiah, right?
Yeah. So Peter is hyper-focused on the tents. And while he's talking about this, then God declares something from the clouds. He says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." So this is actually not the first time this has happened. This happened with Jesus being baptized in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, and then those same words are declared from the heavens. So what is God saying here? John Chrysostom believes this is a way for God to declare to the disciples to basically fear not, I think. So Chrysostom gives 3 little points here. For if God be mighty, as surely he is mighty, very evidently the Son is so likewise. The Son is like the Father. He is mighty. Be not afraid then of those fearful things, persecution and the crucifixion and whatnot. 2, if you don't buy my first point, now if he is beloved, fear not, for no one gives up one whom he loves. Don't therefore be confounded. Though you love him beyond measure, you love him not as much as he that begat him. Peter very much loves Jesus, but God here is saying that he is my beloved Son, so I love him much more than Peter loves him, and so you should fear not, because I'm not just giving up my Son, right? He's going to rise again, so fear not. And then God says, in whom I am well pleased. Chrysostom says this: for not because he begat him only does he love him, but because he is also equal to him in all respects, and of one mind with him, so that the charm of love is twofold, or rather even threefold, because he is the Son, because he is beloved, because in him he is well pleased. But what means in whom I am well pleased? It is though he has said, in whom I am refreshed, in whom I take delight, because he is in all respects perfectly equal with the Father, and there is but one will in him and in the Father, and though he continue a Son, he is in all respects one with the Father.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of love going on there. And Chrysostom's point is God is telling the disciples, you shouldn't be afraid. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. I'm not just throwing him away. He said all these things about what's going to happen to him. I'm not just throwing him away. I love him, and so you should fear not.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Any other thoughts before we kind of summarize, to conclude?
I have some application from Chrysostom, but maybe that's part of the conclusion. I take it.
Yeah, I would love that. Johnny, any other thoughts you'd like to share?
No, I still think that regardless, we can extrapolate a lot, but I think regardless, one thread is true that is communicated in this account, and that is that even in that statement, this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased, it's that Jesus is Christ, and he stands above Moses and Elijah. But, I think most Jewish readers would have read the Gospels reading, understanding Moses' connection to the law and Elijah's connection to the prophets, and would be saying, okay, the law is still alive, the prophets are still alive. Like these things are not done with. We're not finished with the law and the prophets, and Jesus said as much. He said, now one iota of this is going to disappear, that I'm going to fulfill these things, right? But that Jesus is Lord over those things. He's Lord over the law and the prophets, and it stands above the law and the prophets to define them. So that seems to me what is being communicated to the Jewish readers to really solidify the deity of Christ.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was kind of my is what's the point of this? Why was this necessary? Is for them, this is a clear definitive apologetic for the deity of Christ, that he is the Messiah and the fulfillment of the law and the prophets.
At the very least, it's a statement of those closest to Jesus that this is what we believe about Jesus, is that he is
Right.
God.
No, and you're right, and
Yeah.
I mean that specifically for the three that are witnessing
Right,
it.
absolutely.
That
Yeah.
this was a very personal experience for them
Right.
to know.
Right.
To know
Yeah.
that Jesus was the Messiah.
Yeah.
And I think, we read what happens next, right? Like they needed that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And even still they doubted and fled and, do their thing because we're human and that's, what we do. But I think it's really powerful. I think oftentimes we read over that and we're just kind of like, that's weird. I guess it's kind of cool. Some Old Testament guys showed up. That's kind of fun. That's a nice cameo. But this is actually pretty powerful, right? So, application.
Yeah, so
So what?
John Chrysostom is a pastor, and so when he writes about these are all sermons. So he says, it's such a great honor that Peter, James, and John had such a great honor to behold this event. And not all the disciples were there. It was only Peter, James, and John. And so what a great honor to behold that. But then Chrysostom says this, if we will, we also shall behold Christ, not as they then on the mount, but in far greater brightness. It was great for them, but we have something even greater to look forward to. Hereafter he shall come in the very glory of the Father, not with Moses and Elijah only, but with the infinite host of the angels, with the archangels, with the cherubim, with those infinite tribes, not having a cloud over his head, but even heaven itself being folded up. So we look forward to that time when Jesus will return in greater glory than the Transfiguration. And then he continues, he quotes Matthew 13:43, then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun, or rather more than the sun. Since on the Mount too, when he says, he did shine as the sun, for the same cause did he so speak. For that comparison did not come up to his light, the apostle showed by falling down. For if his face shining like the sun was actually comparable to the sun, they would not have fallen, but would easily have borne it, just as we stand outside and we look at the sun and it's kind of bright, but we don't fall down. The righteous, therefore, will shine as the sun, and more than the sun in that time. So we look to a time when our faces will shine as bright as Jesus' face shined in the Transfiguration. Then he says, let us lay aside our filthy garments, let us put on the armor of light, and the glory of God will wrap us around. I think that's very pretty.
Yeah,
It's nice.
it is.
It's
Very
nice.
nice.
It's nice.
I like it. Cool. Well, great question, Dylan. I very much appreciate. We love answering questions, so y'all keep sending them. You can tweet us, you can Instagram us, you can comment them on this YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube. You can email us, theologythursdaypodcast@gmail.com. Any of the avenues that you can find to get to us, do it, and we would love to answer your theology questions. Not because we're experts, because we're students, and we want to share this journey with you. So, again, got an after show. We're going to talk a little bit more about Josh Harris, and it's a Patreon exclusive, so you should go check it out. Ryan?
Yeah.